Oh, I got thumbs up. There we go. As long as he's not throwing something against the wall, I always take that to be a good sign. All right. Did you enjoy this day? Pretty nice outside. Now, Julie, would you rather work out in this weather or like 20 degrees? What's your ideal temperature?
55.
There you go. Yeah. Moves, or 75 with a sea breeze, right? That'd be okay too. Yeah. Marshall had just finishing up his infusion today. So Eddie's taking care of him. Would you rather have Eddie or you take care of him?
Well, it's nice that he has time to decide.
Nicely put. I like that. Nice. All right. Anybody we need to be updated on? Most of the ones I know are just continuation of what we already know. Anything new on anybody? Yeah. You had lower.
Every side effect. Every side effect you can have.
She had her second on Friday, right?
Yep.
Had her second on Friday.
At the house since Friday.
Okay. Well, welcome back to humanity. And now you're vaccinated, so
Yes.
there you go. All right. Well, let's have a word of prayer. Father, tonight we gather in your name. We gather to show our connection to each other, but more importantly to you. We gather in your name to honor you. We gather in your name to be filled with your Spirit so that we can continue your work in this world. So this week we pray for opportunities and that we would see them. That you would use our voice, use our actions to bring encouragement and help to people. We thank you for all that you do to energize us through mutual support and mutual encouragement. I thank you for this church and its ability to love people. I thank you for this community that makes an impact on the surrounding area and on this nation. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, I don't know that I would have noticed this as much if I hadn't moved here, but the number of times that Charlottesville is referenced on the news is quite often. Because in 2017 we were the focal point for something that had larger meaning than just for us locally, right? And something happened there. I don't know that we fully know all of the ramifications of that. But that's the kind of moment we're talking about in Nehemiah. And you can think of different moments, some for us collectively. You know, there's some obvious ones, like 9/11. I mean, we could spend several moments you talking about your recollection of how you became aware and the impact. You also have personal moments, but there's something about collective moments that stay with us and we hold in our memory. And that's, I think, a good thing. I try not to call things good or bad, because usually they're a mixture of both, right? There's certainly some things that have better components and fewer negative parts, and other events that are hard to necessarily see all the good in them, because sometimes it takes a while to see. But that's the point we're at in Nehemiah. Of all the things we talk about in Ezra and Nehemiah, the rebuilding of the temple, the rebuilding of the wall, I think this might be, for me, the most significant. Even though we would put the plaques up for the other things and they would get the headlines, this moment here in chapter 10, I think has great significance. So let's take a look and see what the text can speak to us tonight. If you remember, we're actually backing up one verse to 938. Hebrew Bible has it as part of chapter 10, but for some reason, later on they moved it to end of 9. But we're going to start with 938. Remember, they had confessed publicly over hours. In view of all this, we are making a binding agreement, putting it in writing, and our leaders, our Levites, and our priests are affixing their seals to it. So it wasn't just enough to say, we messed up, we were wrong, we sinned. It's not just a simple, you hurt your brother, say you're sorry. There was more to it. They were making a change, a covenant. Things aren't going to be the same going forward. And covenant is really the right word because covenant conveys so much more. This is not a contract between God and his people. This is not a transaction. This is a binding agreement, something greater. It's a covenant. The best way we can think of is marriage. And even though there's a legal side to marriage, it's much more than just a contract. And God had with the Israelites for thousands of years made covenant, right? Starting with Abraham. And when people in the ancient world made a covenant, it was always two-sided. If you'll do this, I'll do this, and if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. So it was not something you just said, sure, why not? It's something that you considered seriously. Saturday or Sunday, I don't remember, I was talking to Larry about baptism because two of his kids have recently been baptized, and that's going to cause other kids to talk and think about it. And just talking about how do you approach kids as they get it. This is a big deal. This is important. But I really always wanted them to understand this is like getting married. This is not, this would be a fun thing to do. Everybody else is doing it. Are you aware of what you're signing up for? What's going to be expected from you? And I think there's a lot of beauty in a young person making that commitment. I was 20 when I married Denise. There were probably people thought, well, they're too young, right? Especially if it was today, people seem to be delaying marriage. But there's something about making an early commitment, covenant, and sticking with it. But there's also something very beautiful in what's happening here in Nehemiah, in that this is really a very ancient covenant. And in spite of everything the Israelites have done, what's God doing? He has stayed faithful, and he's renewing the covenant. Have you ever been at that moment where you thought, okay, I've really blown it this time. There's no fixing this. And that may be true. There are things that happen on a job or with a friendship, but not with God. And I think that's the realization that these Israelites, remember we talked about the joy of the Lord is our strength. It's not thinking about all the ways we've messed up, even though we have. It's about thinking about how are we moving forward in God welcoming us back into that covenant. So I think we're going to do 10 and 11 tonight because both the chapters have their fair share of names. But in chapter 10, just look at the first name. I don't know who most of the rest of those people are. They don't mean anything to me. But that first name does, right? Nehemiah, the governor. He could have easily said, it's those people. It's you people that are here before I got here. But one of his strengths is he's owned and joined everything that his fellow Israelites have been a part of. And not just in the present time, but historically. And so their confession wasn't just about the last year. It was about the last 200 years. And he puts his name right at the beginning. But for me, that's significant. If he's going to be leader, what does he need to do? He needs to lead. He needs to step up. He needs to be first. First is important. If you don't ever have a first, you don't ever go anywhere. But the names after are just as important, right? This was not going to work. This was not going to be anything. This was not going to be a pivotal moment if he wasn't joined. And I think there's like 84 names on that list. So this is significant. And each of those names doesn't just represent a person. We're so individually situated sometimes. But each of those names represents a household, a family, a clan. So this is a significant representation of the Israelites. We often focus on the individual component of confession, and that's certainly appropriate and right. But sometimes it's harder for us, and I think we're experiencing this as a country. It's hard for us to make a true communal, common confession of what we've all been a part of. We tell a story of how wonderful and perfect everything is, knowing that it is not. As if denying the other side of that is somehow helpful. As I read about Germany, they have owned the Holocaust. And I think it has helped them communally, even though you as a German may not have participated directly in the imprisoning of Jews. There's something in owning as a country, we were off. We were headed the wrong direction. We're going to do it different going forward. And when I look at this pandemic, that's an opportunity for us to right things that have been headed in wrong directions on all kinds of levels. Well, let's pick up in verse 28 because I'm not going to read all the names there. The rest of the people, not just the leaders, priests, Levites, gatekeepers, musicians, temple servants, and all who separated themselves from the neighboring peoples. I just have trouble thinking that this is a purity thing. I see it more as they're stepping out and stepping forward to their responsibility. They're not going to hide in the crowd. They're not going to disappear into the multitude, but they are willing to step up and say, yes, we own this confession. We have been part of this. we're part of this legacy. And notice why they did it. For the sake of the law of God. They were called to something higher, and I think inspired to overcome any fears or doubts to step forward, together with their wives and all their sons and daughters who were able to understand. All these now join their fellow Israelites, the nobles, in binding themselves with a curse and an oath, that's the covenant, to follow the law of God given through Moses, the servant of God, and to obey carefully all the commands, regulations, decrees of the Lord our God. So they get very specific now. I like that. They didn't say, oh, we'll just do good from now on. They were specific in how they were going to move forward. In verse 30, it sounds a little odd to us, right? We promise not to give our daughters in marriage to the peoples around us, or take their daughters for our sons. I don't know what it was like for you, but I didn't really give my daughter. She made that decision, right? Both of them. But this was during a time when the parents did decide. It was on them to make the match. That was the expectation. And so now they're saying, we're going to pay attention to who we're connecting our kids to. If we're going to say following God is important, it matters who we enter into earthly covenants with. What is our true value? What we say or what we do? And so they're committing to doing the kind of things that support their true values. Then they really get verse 31 to where it really matters. The pocketbook, right? When the neighboring peoples bring merchandise or grain to sell it on the Sabbath, we're going to tell them they're evil and kill them, right? See, I think it's interesting here is they're not imposing their covenant on everybody else. They're saying this is what we're going to do. We will not buy from them on the Sabbath or any holy day. Why weren't they going to do that? Well, because the law said you don't buy grain on the Sabbath. If we're going to say we're making a covenant with God's laws, we better be willing to say this is what we're going to do. Every 7th year we will forego working the land and will cancel all debts. So they're saying we'll obey the rules and laws and not let greed and the pursuit of more be what frames us. I think sometimes I would always think of Sabbath as a day of rest. On the 7th day, God rested. But I think that word alone doesn't really convey the strength of Sabbath. It's not a day you get to recharge so you can get back out and get to work. Really, all the working is so that you can have the Sabbath. And a better way to think about Sabbath is to use the word stop. On the Sabbath, everything stopped. And for us as modern people, we would find that difficult, right? Could you take 25 hours and stop? Just process that. How would that change what you were doing? And by stop, I mean no media. Right? It's not like, oh, I'm not going to answer email, I'll just read it. It's stop. There's some trust in the covenant with God to say, okay, we're going to stop every seventh day. We're going to make room for something that we say is more important, but we never get around to making more important. During this last year, there have been people, I've been reading reports of people who have found ways of having some Sabbath. It was kind of forced on them. I think the real question is, will they continue those kind of habits? And I'm not saying you need to take 25 hours, but we do need time where we just stop and we step away. And maybe with just a few, our family, a small group, be able just to be still. We don't like that though, do we? I can't imagine a Sabbath with little kids. Because they don't get it, right? So there's some practical matters. But I think it's interesting, that's right here at the first of the list. We're not going to give our people in marriage, but we're going to stop. And what else are they saying by we're not going to work on the Sabbath? What can we take away that? What's a greater principle perhaps than just rigidly stopping? The private school that our kids went to, a little small private school, had some Seventh-day Adventist kids. And some of them were on the basketball team. They played 2 games a week, but those kids only played 1. Because the second game of the week was on Friday night after 6. And they still, not only did they say, we're going to do Saturday as a Sabbath, they followed the Jewish time clock where the day started at sundown. And so those kids didn't play the Friday night game. That's one way to interpret the Sabbath. But I think there's something larger we can see here too. We need to make money in ways that honor God, right? You take your car to Andy or Gaines to get work done, what do you expect? You expect to be treated fairly and with compassion. I was listening to a podcast today about doctors and nurses and compassion in the medical field and how they're having to teach doctors how to treat people with compassion. And the selling point is not that it just provides better health outcomes for people. It actually keeps the doctors and nurses from burning out. Because showing compassion is just not good for the people we give it to. It's also good for us to give it. So this commitment to say, we're going to make our money in ways that honor God, right? If money can fix the problem, it's not a problem, right? To take that burden of finances being the most important thing. Or, one job I think I would have a lot of trouble with, it would be being a payday lender, right? They charge high fees. It's to people that usually are not able to interact with a bank. They take advantage of people who don't have very much. I would hope that I would not find that attractive. I had a friend who had a tire rental business. It took me a long time to get how do you rent tires? But it's the same thing as the rent to own kind of thing, right? People could not afford, didn't have the credit, and so he could jack up the prices, jack up the cost. But because they could do it on a weekly or monthly basis, they could rent the tires. And it just, I don't know. It was strange to me. So I think part of what we're hearing in this covenant and what they're doing and how they're now maybe going to look at their life is, do we honor God even how we make our money? We trust to say we don't have to pursue every dollar. We don't have to get the maximum profit from every deal. I don't know this, but I think I do know this. I'm going to say there have been times that Andy, even though he was in the right, he made things right when he didn't have to. Would you have any trouble believing that about Andy? Well, no, because you know his faith. You know the kind of person he is. And so I want you to think about times that you've done that, where you could have pressed for more. You may have even been in the right. And you said, no, this will be enough. That's what I'm talking about. And I think that's at the heart of this Sabbath. We don't have to be open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, so we can maximize profits. Are you aware of B corporations? There are a growing number of corporations that say profit is not our first goal. Yeah, if we're going to be a business, we've got to make a profit, right? But it's people, planet's profit, not profit above everything else. And they're calling those B corporations. People first, that's their customers and their workers. The planet, we're going to treat the planet right. And then, we're going to make a profit. Verse 32. I love these words. We assume the responsibility. Whether it's theirs or not, they're saying we're taking it, we're picking it up. We assume the responsibility for carrying out the commands to give 1/3 shekel of silver. That's about 4 grams. That's not a whole lot, but it was for the service of the house of God. For the bread set on the table, for the regular grain offerings and burnt offerings, for the offerings of the Sabbath, at the new moon feast, and the appointed festivals, for the holy offerings, for the offerings, the sin offering, purification offerings, to make atonement for Israel. So they're not only committed to how they're going to make their money. What is this a commitment to? Assuming the responsibility on how you spend it. Do we have a responsibility on using the things that we've been given? We, the priests, the Levites, and the people, have cast lots to determine when each family is to bring to the house of God at set times each year a contribution of wood to burn on the altar of the Lord our God, as it is written in the law. And again, verse 35, we also assume responsibility for bringing to the house of the Lord each year the first fruits of our crops and of every tree. Is there faith in bringing first fruits? Well, yeah, because you don't always know how much fruit's coming after that. As it's also written in the law, we will bring the firstborn of our sons and of our cattle and of our herds and of our flocks to the house of our God, to the priest ministering there. And it goes on, 37, they're bringing ground meal and fruit of the trees and new wine and olive oil. They're bringing it to the Levites. That's how the Levites did the work of God. They served the people, but the people served them. They were the preachers, right? They worked in serving the people. And what's our conclusion with all of this? This big long list of things they're assuming the responsibility to do. We will not neglect the house of our God. Firstborn, first fruit, they're going to bring the tithe, and they're even bringing special tithes above and beyond. And what I take away from this is I need to spend my money in a way that honors God. That makes sense to us, but it's a holy thing that we do. God is a giver. And what does that mean for us? We're givers too, right? And it's easy to think of that just financially, but it's much larger than that. I mean, that's first fruits and firstborn. There was a lot of investment. It was not just a check, even though that was part of it, right? It was a responsibility that they would assume. Now chapter 11. They've made that commitment, but there's still things to do. Why? We rebuilt the temple. We rebuilt the wall. There's more to do. Well, yeah, because nobody's really lived much in Jerusalem for 150 years. There's a few things to fix, right? Now the leaders of the people settled in Jerusalem. Again, who's taking the first steps? It says the leaders. The idea here is they had other places to live, and Jerusalem was so important to reestablish, they moved. They didn't go, we kind of got it good here, why don't you go? You don't have... The way this country was built was people looking for new opportunity left, right? They went seeking their fortune. It's not working out here. I'm going to go somewhere else. And sometimes that worked out and sometimes it didn't. It wasn't the people that were well established that say, we need to move to Iowa. I can't imagine the first person who thought that was a good idea, but somebody did. The rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 out of every 10 to them to live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while remaining 9 were to stay in their own towns. Yeah, we don't need everybody to move to Jerusalem, but 10%, that would be a good number. We can reestablish the city. This is going to say something about who we are. The people commended all who volunteered to live in Jerusalem. So even though they cast lots to see, it doesn't, I don't get the feel that it was like, you got the black marble, you lost. It was like, you got the white marble, you won. You get to move and be part of what's happening in Jerusalem. It's the opposite of what we see sometimes as things change in our area. Are you familiar with NIMBY? Does that mean anything to you? NIMBY means not in my backyard. That's a really good idea, but just don't do it here. Yes, I think we need more solar, we need more wind energy, and I think we need to build those giant propellers, but like way over there, not here. Or in Denver, they passed a law where every new housing unit, multi-unit, had to have a variety of levels, right? They couldn't all be $5,000 a month. There had to be some affordable, a certain percentage had to be affordable housing. Because people are like, yeah, we're for affordable housing, but not here, not next door to me. You know, one thing I can't get over is I saw a few years ago, every county in the United States is short on affordable housing. There is not one county in the United States that has enough affordable housing. So it's not just in some areas, it's all areas. And we like the idea, but it's a different thing to say, we're going to build it here. And in Denver, they're all required to put that in, or you can pay a fee, but not insignificant, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then you don't have to do that. Guess what most of these luxury apartments are doing? They're buying out of that. It's a great idea, but when we say, yeah, as long as we don't take part in that. It's a great idea to reestablish Jerusalem, but I ain't going. They had people who stepped forward, who accepted the responsibility to continue to move forward. They didn't say, we built the wall, we're done. There was more to do, and they kept going. I think that's what I want to take away from that. And so you can read all the names. And that's really chapter 11. So I think there's some powerful things we can see here that causes me to reflect on my attitude and posture to God. Am I living into the covenant I made to him? But it also allows me to question myself and say, am I living into the covenant I made to my community? Am I being responsible with how I make money and how I spend money? And that's a great reflection to have. And a reflection we need to stop ever so often and figure out. Glad you're here tonight. Next week, Nehemiah 12.